Now, the legacy of two-time presidential candidate Ross Perot, who passed away of leukemia today at his home in Dallas. We begin with a look back at the anti-establishment, self-made Texas billionaire.
We want to close on our theme song. Let's hit it, Ed.
We're crazy.
An early disruptor, Ross Perot was a tech entrepreneur turned self-made billionaire, turned the most successful third-party candidate in modern American political history. Born in Depression-era Texas, Perot went on to serve in the Navy before getting a job as a salesman with IBM. The scrappy businessman eventually sold his first company, Electronic Data Systems, to General Motors for $2.5 billion.
We've got to rebuild our great country. We've got to make our country the envy of the world again. And I can't sleep until the words "Made in the USA" once again become the world standard correctly.
But Perot is best known for his insurgent third-party candidacy in the 1992 presidential election against President George H.W. Bush and Democratic challenger Bill Clinton.
I was not put on the ballot by either of the two parties. This is a movement that came from the people.
Mixing brashness with charm, the political outsider pitched himself as a fighter for everyday Americans.
The party's over, and it's time for the cleanup crew.
And he lambasted lawmakers in Washington as out of touch, paramount being President Bush.
I think it's experience at this level.
Well, they've got a point. I don't have any experience in running up a $4 trillion debt.
Perot kept up his attacks, most of them squarely on Mr. Bush, in the '92 presidential debates, moderated by the NewsHour's Jim Lehrer.
Free and fair trade is the answer, not protection.
While President Bush pushed free trade deals like NAFTA, Perot pushed back.
We have got to stop sending jobs overseas. There will be a giant sucking sound going south. So if the people send me to Washington, the first thing I'll do is study that 2,000-page agreement and make sure it's a two-way street. Since we're dealing with voodoo economics, a great young lady from Louisiana sent me this voodoo stick.
Perot's non-traditional campaign included 30-minute TV infomercials on issues like the national deficit, complete with homemade charts. The programs drew more than 16 million viewers.
Just this year, we ran up $341 billion in new debt, and as we discussed the other night, that's our legislators and our president trying to buy our vote this year with what used to be our money. We're not that dumb.
In the end, 19.7 million Americans voted for Perot in the 1992 election. Republicans forever blamed him for Clinton's win, claiming he siphoned votes from Bush. But later analysis undercut that. Perot went on to run in the 1996 presidential election before dropping out. A philanthropist in his later years, Perot is survived by his wife Margot, 5 children, and 16 grandchildren. Ross Perot was the best-performing third-party presidential candidate since Teddy Roosevelt in 1912. Some perspective now on his life and legacy from a man who knew Perot for decades, moderated 2 of his presidential debates, and is a very familiar face to our viewers. I'm so pleased to welcome back NewsHour co-founder Jim Lehrer. Welcome back to this program.
Thank you, Judy. Thank you.
Very well. So I knew Ross Perot after he became famous. He was running for president, successful businessman. But you knew him long before that. How did you get to know him?
Well, I met him in Dallas. He was a computer guy who had an idea about the way to computerize federal medical systems, and he created this incredible company, and he made millions and millions of dollars. Because he had been a naval officer and I had been a Marine officer at the same time, there was some overlap. Most of the people who went to work for him were former Navy officers and Marine officers. So anyhow, I met him that way, and then somebody said, you know, you ought to get to know Ross Perot. You're going to hear about him a lot in the future. So I made an appointment, went over and see him, and he and I hit it off, and we became, there was already a bond there of that military thing that is always there. But at any rate, I stayed with him until I left to come to Washington. He had already shown that when he had millions and millions of dollars, he wanted to use it to help other people. He had already shown that he was a guy who was not taken with himself. He was taken with his ideas, but he was not the standard kind of showboat, Texas millionaire kind of guy. He was a guy who had millions of dollars and he wanted to use it for good things.
What was he like as a person?
Well, he was funny. He was straight. He was authentic. The Ross Perot that you sit around a table and talk to was the same guy who was in a debate stage many years later as a candidate for president of the United States. He always seemed to feel comfortable with himself. He was not an ideologue. He didn't wake up every morning and say, well, I'm a conservative, so I got to believe, I'm a liberal. No, but he decided every day, I'm Ross Perot, and here's what I believe. And it was the foundation and the motivation for everything he did in public life, politics and other things as well.
Were you surprised when he said he was going to run for president? He brought this idea about we're going to get government spending down, we got to tackle this deficit.
I've thought about that today, and that very question. Because I remember now, and I hope I'm not basing this on what I hoped my feelings were then. I thought that makes sense for this guy. In other words, my feelings about him were all positive. We were friends, not personal friends, professional friends, and I felt I admired him because I liked what he had done. He had supported the military during the Vietnam War. He wasn't in favor of the war necessarily. He didn't have a political position on it, but he supported the people who fought in the war, and he spent a lot of his money taking care of POW families and all that sort of stuff. But when he announced for president, I thought, oh, yeah, Ross Perot running for president. And then, of course, we did a lot of interviews with him on the NewsHour, right. And I saw him a lot during all that stuff, and he just confirmed. It made me a little bit proud, to have known him and know that, hey, yeah. And I kept telling people, pay attention to this guy. He's not going to just come and go.
And he did better as an independent candidate. Everybody knows how hard it is to run for president as independent. He ended up getting, as we said, over, 19-some million votes for president. But Jim, you did moderate those two debates in 1992 with him, with then President George H.W. Bush and Bill Clinton. Tell us some memories of that.
Well, the biggest memory was the major debate I did was at Michigan State University, and it was a 90-minute debate. But the debate commission had negotiated with the candidates that the first 45 minutes, for the first time, would be a single moderator, and it would be wide open in terms of rules and all of that. And this was a big deal. So once the debate started, and then in the second 45 minutes, they're going to bring in three panelists. We do the old-fashioned way, which is the way these debates used to be. But at any rate, things started, and I got just the way, it wasn't me. I mean, I asked the questions, but George H.W. Bush and Bill Clinton got into it about Clinton's record in Arkansas. They went back and forth. And Perot, over here on the right, didn't get to say anything. He kept looking at me. I knew he was going to say something, and this whole debate could go right up into smoke. At any rate, he finally said,
Is there an equal time rule here tonight?
Yes.
Or do you just keep lunging in at will? I thought we were going to have equal time, but maybe I just have to interrupt the other two. Is that the way it works this period?
No, Mr. Perot, you're doing fine.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Okay.
Whatever you want to say it.
He looked at me, and he was ready to go, and I looked at him, and he heard me, and he hushed. And he was terrific at the debate. If he had played games in that debate, it would have hurt him. And from my point of view, and I was looking at it from my point of view as well, but also from the viewer's point of view, it could have been a disaster, and it wasn't, because he understood. He understood what he needed to do.
You've told us so much about his life. What do you think his legacy is? I mean, we've talked about most successful independent candidate since Teddy Roosevelt.
The reason he was successful is he had two things going for him that sound familiar in the current situation, but they're not quite that familiar. He had ideas that were not driven by ideology. For instance, he was pro-choice. He was for gun control, as most real military people are who know about guns. But at the same time, he was very conservative about the military, about budgets and all that. He did
Fiscally.
welfare and all of that. So as I say, he made his own thing. But what he had, and he was able to explain what he believed and why he believed it. But he had that additional thing was he had resources. He made it. He spent $68 million of his own money. There was nothing about small donors. There were no donors, just Ross Perot. And he spent huge amounts of money, and he got and for these things that he did, these 30-minute infomercials he used you could have all the Ross Perot positives, but without the resources, it's not going to work. That's the legacy of the two things that he had going for him, and anybody wants to write the lessons for the future, that's it.
Scrappy. That's the word we think of with him. Jim Lehrer, thank you very much for coming back to talk about Ross Perot.